Don't get my photos dirty. So I thought I would just extend my show and tell with some more photos and talk about how and when I started the business and, how I learned to do what I do. Um, this is a couple photos that I missed from last time. This is a desktop organizer out of oak. I think you can see these better in the natural light. Joe, this is not a Joe show. This is not the Joe channel, Joe. Come on. You've got your own channel. So I made this for, I think it was a secretary at my high school. Then I designed this chair, which later fell apart. I made the cushions for it and sketched it out and kind of, I don't know, I didn't really use the right kind of joinery there, so it failed. But I just want to make a point about that is that, I had a pretty high failure rate when I was teaching myself how to do this stuff. And there's good and bad things about being self-taught and learning from experimenting and making mistakes. Things really stick when you're teaching yourself and you make a mistake. It's like then you get it. Whereas if you're just absorbing the information from somebody else, it doesn't really process mentally the same way, and you're more likely to forget what you learned. But if you already made the mistake and it made you upset and ruined your project, you're more likely not to forget and make that mistake again. So teaching yourself how to do things by trial and error can be an effective way to learn, but it is a more costly way to learn. And if you're trying to get started out on your own in the business world, you really can't afford to make any mistakes, really. Just one bad job can put you out of business. And it can be a simple mistake too. It can be just, guessing about moisture content, using the material inappropriately, painting something the wrong color, anything. Any simple thing can ruin a job. And you want to be able to get all your mistakes made ahead of time before you start a business. And I had employment for a year or a year and a half in a cabinet shop. So I learned a little bit about business, in that short period of time. But, when I was a kid, just, experimenting with furniture making and doing stuff for relatives and friends of the family, it wasn't really a big deal. So one of the common questions I get when I'm making introductions with people is, I might say I'm a woodworker, and it might perk their interest, and they'll want to know, well, what kind of woodworker? What kind of work do I do? So I'm going to start with that question here and just get that base covered, because I really don't have a good answer to that question, and it's just like, it's confusing. Like it's a long answer and a complicated one, and usually it kind of kills the conversation because I don't want to talk about it. I'll just respond, be like, yeah, I make anything. It just, I work with other stores. They tell me what they want to build, and I just kind of don't even want to get into it because it's complex, and it's not really the work that I would want to build, and that's difficult for people to relate to. So rather than get into that whole, topic with people, I try to avoid the conversation and just say, yeah, I build anything. I'm a woodworker. If it's wood, I build it. I make toothpicks out of 2x4s for $50 an hour. Just make a joke. So, but the answer to the question, goes into the whole marketing and the relationship that I had with these stores that were, trying to build their brand name image. And I was providing a service to them, building, their product line. But I was, developing the finishes in a way that was, distinguishing from other competing factory finishes. So I have a set here of different color chips. This one was called Mustard over Natural. And you can see the crackling effect in this color. Not all colors behave the same way with the crackle. Some will react more than others. Like this red color almost never crackles. There's a little bit, but very tiny amount. And then I can do colors over other colors for contrasting effects. This one is blue over light cream. These are applied in 5, 6, or 7 layers, all by hand. The color coat is applied with the sponge. And it's a very tedious process. The factories that kind of do the same style finish, it's done in a completely different way with spray guns and assembly line type finishing, where they go into these ovens and dry one coat and then go to the next spray booth, and it all goes in production, and they can do a whole finish in one assembly line, which is impressive. Not all of it is done the same way, but generally it's sprayed on. That's the factory method, and spraying it on gives a more even texture. The sponge gives a little bit more texture to the surface, and so that kind of enhances the natural appearance of the paint. So I opt to do it like the hand method, and that's kind of like my style of finishing, which makes it a little bit more unique. But it is time costly. It's not an efficient process, painting things with a little sponge. And I can typically spend more time in the finishing process than building some of the pieces that I make. But I just want to show this, and make the point that, I've developed this finishing process that's unique and, artistically oriented. I mean, it does take an artistic eye to be able to do it, and you do have to understand the materials, how the paint behaves. You have to have like a higher level understanding of paint to be able to make that process work right. Because it's fussy, like, when it's really dry, like, the paint can have problems. There's just all kinds of things that can go wrong. But it's the same with spray booths, too. If you're doing a spray finish, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. And you have to understand how your spray guns work. Finishing is an important part of your business plan and, how you're going to compete with other factories and other woodworkers, and how you're going to distinguish yourself as whatever you're going to be. The finishing is an important part. A lot of woodworkers kind of fall short on, really focusing in on the finish, and they stress other elements. Here's the clincher. I don't like painting. I'm just like any other woodworker. I like natural finishes. I like using the grain. I like that effect after you apply that first coat of oil and all those colors and patterns kind of pop out. I'm just like any other woodworker. Okay, so when I show my refined and complex finishing process using paint, it confuses people. And, it's difficult for me to explain. But I look at it as just a job. I'm getting paid to be an artist. It's my job to make it look good. And the fact that I can make a piece of furniture made from new material look almost indistinguishable from an antique, it's something that I can use to compete and sell my work at a higher price, in theory. But it's not really my thing. But it confuses people because they think I'm like this artist that does distress paint finishes, and like this is like my expression. And Joe, you're really enjoying that sun. But anyways, it's not my expression. Like, I really don't care much for paint or painted furniture. But in terms of marketing, I totally respect what it does, because I've seen the effect on people when they see that special color that resonates with them, and they just go nuts and fall in love, and then they get out their checkbook and it's like, wow, you just dropped how much money and it was that easy just because they like the color. Natural finishes are just so much more labor intensive in terms of material selection and surface preparation. On these distress paint finishes, I don't actually have to do any sanding. Sometimes I can just, break the edges and, it's done. So there's minimal surface prep. I do have to be careful about bleed through and knots. So here's my catalog. This is my comprehensive catalog. And it's just a collection of all my different designs, and I just compiled it into one catalog. This is the largest hutch I ever made. It's almost 17 feet long. And it was quite a project. And I also want to make a video showing these stars. I made a whole bunch of these, and I think this would just be a cool project for a video. And I made a jig to cut all of those angles. And see, I kind of have a preference for the natural barnwood look. These are some barnwood pieces that I designed a long time ago. I can see this. Joe, you're going to have to move, buddy. You're taking up my sun. Come on. So these are a couple of barnwood pieces that I designed. And I have better pictures of these online, so I can show those at the end. But I like the pattern with the mitered breadboards. I kind of had an affinity for mitered breadboards for some reason. So this is a coffee table that I made, and then I did some with the soapstone, and those sold pretty well in the stores. And this is the first cabinet that I made out of barnwood. And this is some of the funky stuff that I'd like to get into. The magnet cubes. I went crazy for a little while. And I have some better pictures of this, and this is another table I designed. This was made in the wood shop where I was employed at that time. But that was before I started a business. It was kind of like the next design after this one, made out of white oak. And then I wanted to start making these puzzle boxes and little trinkets and doodads. There's definitely a lot of ground to cover with furniture making. I still got to finish my cutting boards. Jeez, Well, I should probably finish this video and get started on something. So I'll just wrap this up. This is just another little show and tell about, you know, how I started. So, you know, this product line with the painted finishes, just to conclude here, it wasn't really my idea. And in fact, the guy that started this business that I, later took over, this whole product line was actually part of another retail store in California somewhere. And he worked at that store. So he basically stole the ideas that were already working at a different location on the different side of the country, brought them to New York, and then, started it as like an original brand new thing, and everybody bought it. Okay? But the whole thing started from a stolen or borrowed idea, and, then tweaked in such a way to, make it more unique and improved upon certain things. And when I took over, I changed a lot of things and improved on the finishes and, took it to the next level. So that's the process of, developing something. In a lot of cases, it starts with somebody else's idea. And, that's just the way it ended up. When I certainly had no intention of ever doing painted finishes, I'll tell you that. When I started learning, it was like learning to ride a bike for the first time. It was really awkward. But, I got used to the material and got good at painting eventually. Once you spend 1,000 hours painting, the skills come naturally. But if it's worth anything to know, if it makes you feel better about my work as a craftsman, I definitely like working with hardwoods, cherry, walnut. I like natural finishes. I don't like staining wood. I don't like covering it with paint. It's just, whenever I do it, there's a marketing reason, because that's what somebody wants. Okay, so, don't get confused with my sensibilities as a craftsman, because my favorite wood is actually white oak. I liked working with it. These two things are actually made out of white oak. I just really like that wood for some reason. Its durability, and it seemed to cut really nice. But it is difficult to work with. That's right. I've had some crazy experiences learning to do what I do and being in business. And as a result, I have a really just horrible attitude about being self-employed and working with wood. And that often really throws people for a loop and confuses them, because most craftspeople are pretty romantic with their work, and I'm quite the opposite. So all I do is talk shit about being in business and how risky it is, and all those pitfalls and everything that can go bad. And I'm going to make up for that, though. I'm going to make up for my negative attitude by telling really great stories for everybody to enjoy and learn from. So stay tuned.
you.